In this video, I'm going to show you the process after you've found the final workflow for what you're going to teach, to create a list of milestones, of those key moments you need to remember. I have made a list of all these things, and I'm going to show you how I came about them. So first of all, always work with this file as a second file and start in a new empty document and start building things up. So I take my milestone, which says show final scene. So I create a new document and I write down on a piece of paper or some other form of note-taking device that I need to create a new empty project. Then I'm going to go and create a capsule. And I'll write down on my notes, create capsule. And I've added the parameters, which are 4, 16, and 32. Now, of course, you can go and scramble and put random values here and show people what's going on. But it's better if you present users with a specific parameter when that parameter works for your case and explain it if it needs explaining. So let's continue. The next thing is I need to see the topology of this, and I'm going to go to the display and turn on grow shading lines. One thing I'm going to fix now is I'm going to change the order. First, I'm going to bring up the grow shading lines, and then I'm going to change the parameters. And the reason is that by having the grow shading lines active, they can see that when you had your default values, they would see this, and when they change the values, press enter, they can see what each value changes. Now here's a key moment, something we're going to do in the next video when we start recording this, and that is the following. If you're planning to zoom in to show the attribute manager, what you can do is navigate, bring this close to here, then zoom in this area so that it's very obvious when you change a particular parameter, for example, the cap segments to 16 and press enter, they can immediately and clearly see what changed. Sometimes you can even go and scrub a bit so they can see the changes being applied and then just go and change the number to whatever the number you wish to be. And while you're doing these things, take your notes so you know the order of execution of what you're trying to do, and that will optimize your ability to record the tutorial nicely. So let me just bring this back in the center by pressing H. Now the next thing I need to do is fracture this. So say something, put a note in your milestones and say bring up Voronoi fracture object, and here's a Voronoi fracture. I know I don't need to take a milestone, that I need to make this a child of this, and now select the Voronoi fracture object, go to the sources and you write down a milestone, go to Voronoi fracture and go to sources tab, and I'm going to move this up, I'm going to move this here, and you take a note of that, and you say that the point generator distribution is the default points that create this fracture, select it and delete it. Excellent. Now, the next milestone is I want to create a radial fracturing pattern. And in order to do that, I need to create a circle. So you zoom out. You can bring this down if you wish. It doesn't really matter. Bring this right here in the middle and go and add a circle. So take a note, add default circle in 3D viewport. And then, because people are wondering why did you create a circle, go back to the Voronoi fracture and say, I'm going to use the circle as an input for the source of fracturing. And now it's very obvious why you created a circle and what it's doing. Now, if you want to give further explanations about how the circle works, how many points and the distribution and all that, go ahead and do it. But you're not required to do it because there are many tutorials that deal with this subject in particular. So if you find one of these tutorials, whether it's on Cineversity or any other source, you can say, for more details on how to use the fracture with other objects and so forth, please go to the description text below and click the available links and something like that. The more information you give your viewers, the better it is for them to understand what you are talking about. Now, the other thing you can do now is if you select the circle, you can rotate it to show that the fragments rotate as well. So it's a good time to take a milestone and say rotate circle to demonstrate the fragments rotating as well and so forth. So let me undo this. I took my milestone, and now what I want to do is say, okay, how do we create the interior rotation? And you can always revert to the other file if you wish to do so and show that the animation is counter-rotating. So it's not bad practice to remind people what we are aiming to make. So I take a milestone about that. I write, when I say take a milestone, I take a note on the milestone. And let's show the users how to do that. You can make a copy of this circle by pressing Command or Control, so forth. So you write down your note. You can make it smaller. And now you can go and add this circle as a secondary input for the points. Now you can see that we have some sort of problem here, that although we have two circles, the fragments haven't changed. And this is a very good point to make. The reason is that this is too big, so both of them create the same fragmentation because they also have the same amount of points. To mitigate this problem, just go and make your circle smaller and go and make the other circle smaller. And now you can see that we're creating that double fragmentation. Now take a note that you need to make this slightly bigger so it occupies as much of your viewport as possible. Bring it close to the right side in case you're going to change any parameters and you want to see these changing in unison. The next step would be to select the Voronoi fracture and go and create the gaps in between. So go to the object, show the offset fragments distance, open it up, and there you have it. So now everyone is wondering, how do we go about rotating these? Well, you can go and add keyframes for the circles. You may or may not talk about that because the final method we are going to use will not use rotating circles. It will actually use a matrix object. The reason why we're using the matrix, though, is quite important, and that is to synchronize the fragment indices, and you cannot achieve that by using circles. So it's up to you if you're going to divert a small portion of your tutorial to explain how you would do that using keyframes and rotation, and how you would do that using another method, which is going to be the method we are going to use. So you take a note on that and make a decision at some point if you're going to show both methods. What I would say is that for various reasons, I'm going to use a different method because we are going to have certain problems. Again, it's up to you if you want to go in detail and explain the reasons why this is going to happen. I mean, let me show you since we are here. Let's go and do some rotations. Let's rotate it. It's the B. I can cut this out of my video to show that I'm not scrambling around trying to figure out which parameter is changing. Let's set a keyframe here and go to frame 90 and set this to 360 and add a keyframe. Now select the other circle and let's set this to minus 360 and add a keyframe and go back to frame 0 and set it to 0 and add a keyframe. So now we're going to play the animation and you can see that there's an amount of flashing going on because the fragments changing color means that they are changing indices. And to illustrate that, you can select the Voronoi fracture, go to the Transform tab, and in the display, turn on the indices. And as I'm scrubbing here, you will see, and you can zoom in to a portion of your screen, that some of these indices, and if you pay attention to the 11, when I scrub, it becomes 9. And therefore, it's changing color. And in order to avoid this problem when we're setting up our rig, we will have to use the matrix object. So rewind. And again, take a note about that. Go remove the indices for now because they just add visual clutter. Take a note on that as well. And then say, we're not going to use that. Select the Voronoi fracture, go to the sources, delete these two input sources. And now we need to figure out how we are going to set this up so it works properly. At this point, and because I forget stuff, I can always go back and say, okay, how did I do this? Don't forget, we're not recording now. we're taking notes so that we can follow along later on and make sure that the order of things is correct and we don't forget any major details about our setup. So we're going to put them in a spline mask. That spline mask will be in OR mode along the Z axes, and as far as I remember, they don't have any keyframes. So let's go and do that. Prepare your notepad and let's set this up so we make sure that nothing goes wrong. I'm going to turn off the Voronoi fracture to make sure that the circles are the only ones that are visible, and I take a note on that. I go and scramble to find the spline mask. If you don't remember where it is, just write it down in your milestones. Go to the extrude, click and hold, and bring up the spline mask. Go to the object tab, of course, set it to OR. If you want to explain the different modes here, you can do that. Either link to a tutorial or just leave it as it is. They can search and find the solution for that. Just tell them what they need to do. And put the two circles underneath, and if you want to take a milestone, that's something obvious. The things that are so obvious that you will have to do them when you're recording, you don't have to take notes. So now I will take my milestone that I need to add a matrix object. So I write it down, use matrix. And the way we are going to do this is with a matrix selected, we are going to go and set the matrix object to object mode and drag the spline mask in here. And you can see we've generated some matrices. As far as I remember, the way to animate this is to select the matrix and go and change the rate. So again, take your note and say rate. I have a value set in my mind that is 30%. If you don't remember, just go to your final file and see what's going on, and you press play to see if everything is fine. You can see that there's something going on here which is a bit odd. I didn't expect this, and the reason is that I need to delete my keyframes from the circles, and the reason I know that is because I did the same mistake earlier. So we need to delete these, so make a note which you should add before you add the matrix. Go to the circles and delete the keyframes. So let's delete the keyframes. I'm pressing Command and Shift. I'm going to explain that when I'm doing it. And now let's go and press the animation, and we can see that now they're rotating at a certain speed. You can always go and explain certain things. Maybe you write down, explain what rate is and so forth. You'll find out if you right click and go to the help. It tells you exactly what it is. So I'm happy with how the animation is going, but one of the two circles needs to rotate the other way. Now I want to make it consistent with my final, so I want to see which way each one is moving. So the outer one is moving counterclockwise, the inner one is moving clockwise. So I need to make a note that I need to reverse the rotation of the inner circle. So go to the circle itself, and the way to do this will be to reverse the winding of this particular circle. So I'm writing down reverse the winding of this circle. Fantastic. So now we have the counter-rotating matrices. Fantastic. So let me think of what I want to do now and take my appropriate note. So now it's time to go and apply the matrix to the Voronoi fracture. So let's turn on the Voronoi fracture and the capsule. Let's go to the Voronoi fracture, go to the sources, and drag the matrix in here. And of course, I need to make a note about that. Now, if I press play, you will see we have the same flashing we had earlier, which means that this hasn't solved our problem. So I need to find a way to stabilize those indices. And of course, take a note that you need to go to the fracture object, go to the transform and turn on your indices. So you can see the indices over here, that they are changing from 5 to 3 and so forth. Now the funny thing is that if you turn this off and go and turn on the matrix indices, you will see that the indexing is very much stable. So you can make a note to explain that the index number is not transferred from the matrix to the Voronoi fracture. So we will need another method which has the stability of the matrix indices, and we can transfer that to the Voronoi fracture. The way to solve this is by using the weights. So I'm going to turn on the weights and tell everyone, and take a note, that now the value for the weights is 0, because this defines the value of the weights. You can see this changing. If you want to say it, you can. You don't have to. But if you are going to say it, just make a note that that's what you're going to say. And now I need to show how to transfer the indices, which are stable, onto weights. And I'll do that by converting the indices to a weight parameter using the step effector. Now, if you select the step effector and you need to make a note, you need to go to the parameters, turn off the scaling, and turn on the weight transform. Again, I'm going to make a note that I can turn this off so I can see only the weights. So let's go back to the step, and weight transform will allow us to have a variable number in the weight from 0 to 1 based on the index. Now take a note about turning on your Voronoi fracture or not, and going to the Voronoi fracture and turning off the colors, because now we are actually going to use the values that come from the step effector, those weights that go through the matrix, and those are the ones that are going to colorize this. So we write a note about that. So how do we bring colors from weight information into a MoGraph object? Well, that is through a plane effector. Turn off all the parameters and set this to field colors if that's not the case. Take a note, go to the fall off, and drag the matrix object in here as a MoGraph object. So I took my note. Let's get rid of this and now get the matrix object and explain that by default there is no remapping. Enable the remapping, go to the color remap and set this to a gradient. Lastly, take a note that you want to load a gradient preset and make the colors look like a rainbow. And then just press play and you will show that the animation is stable. So that is fantastic. Up to this point, I've taken all my notes. Now that we have laid out the main technique, the steps to execute this tutorial, then we can show some tangential things if we wish to do so. So first of all, I will instruct them to turn off anything that's redundant, and maybe even go here and turn off the lines, maybe turn off the circles as well so they're not visible. And I'm going to scrub around and see if everything is okay. Yep, everything is fantastic. And what else can we do? Well, some of the tricks which I took notes on were, if you go to the matrix object and start playing with the start and the end, you can actually create some very interesting shapes when this is rotating around. So if you think that this is something you would like to show, then just write down a note and let it be one of your milestones. So now I have all my milestones written down. I made sure that the technique works and all my steps are correct. And in the next video, I'm actually going to record it by referring to my milestones. And I'm going to show you how this looks like when I'm recording it. And then I'm going to edit it and add all the annotations. And at the end, I'm going to provide you with a final tutorial to learn how to do this, which I'm sure now you already know.